There's a river somewhere flows through the lives of everyone. All that's broken on the riverside. Is it a natural state of how it's supposed to be? I think there's something that we just don't see. Good morning and welcome to We Act Radio, broadcasting from historic Anacostia and from our various locations in Washington, D.C. We are joined this morning by Salim Odofo, who is ANC Commissioner for 8C07. For those outside the city, this means a big portion of Ward 8 along the south side of the Anacostia River. And we also have this morning Commissioner Patel, who is from Foggy Bottom in the Northwest, like where the State Department is. I'm assuming that some people are listening who are not from here, and so I'm going to be explaining some things that may seem obvious to some people. So I'm going to admit Commissioner Patel. We're still waiting on Anthony Lorenzo Green, who is also an ANC commissioner from the northeast part of the city, and he is supposed to be joining us this morning to be representing Black Lives Matter DC, and I'm sure he'll be with us soon. But I'm going to bring Commissioner Patel in, and while I'm doing that, I will let our listeners know that this is the Community Through COVID program. It usually airs Wednesdays at 11 a.m. Eastern on We Act Radio, as I said, broadcasting from historic Anacostia, Washington, D.C. I am the host, Virginia Avniel Spatz, and for today's program, I think it's important to recognize I live about 14 blocks from the U.S. Capitol. We have, and also let me say to my guests, I use Virginia on the show and I go by she and her if you need to refer to me. And I'll ask each one of you to introduce yourselves. Tell me again how you pronounce your name and how you prefer to be called. So let's start with Commissioner Adolfo, since he was the first to join us this morning.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Salim Adolfo. I am an Advisory Neighborhood Commissioner for a single member district 8C07, and I serve as the chair of Advisory Neighborhood Commission 8C. I am also the chair of the National Black United Front DC chapter. I've been doing a lot of work on the ground here in Ward 8. Started off doing our Feed the Hood project at the intersection of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. And through block by block organizing, have been able to secure some level of political power and get elected as an advisory neighborhood commissioner. And the goal of that is to help, just bring more resources to the community, make sure that they're as informed as they can. I also serve as a commissioner on the Mayor's Commission of African American Affairs. And once again, that role is to just make sure that we can get resources into the community. So if you know anything about me, I want to be that conduit. But the most important thing that I think a lot of folks don't know is I'm a DJ. So I love the DJ. Old school hip hop music is my passion, and I try to make sure that I can bring a certain level of art and creativity, to activism.
Okay, great, thank you. And shall I call you Commissioner Adolfo, or how would you like to be?
Salim is fine.
Salim, okay. And Anthony Lorenzo Green, I've known for a number of years. I never know whether to call him Anthony or Lorenzo, and so I'm going to ask him also just to go ahead. You missed a little bit of our intro, I think. We are here with Salim Adolfo from Ward 8, with Commissioner Patel, who's from Ward 2, and Anthony Lorenzo Green, who's really representing DC Black Lives Matter, but is also an ANC commissioner. So I'll let you introduce yourself and tell everyone how you'd like to be called. You're on mute. There we go.
Sure, Anthony Lorenzo Green, but it was Ward 8 that started calling me Lorenzo, so that just stuck. Um, and it makes sense because at the time when I came into civic service, there was a lot of Anthony's, so you know. But you know, I'm glad to be here. As you stated, I'm here as part of DC Black Lives Matter, and I also serve as an advisory neighborhood commissioner in Ward 7 in the Deanwood community. I am currently entering, well, I just entered my 5th term as an ANC. I know I'm going to need a lot of therapy when I'm all said and done, but but you know, it's necessary for us to make sure that we have a strong resolve against a lot, not just the white terrorism that we've seen in this city, but the white terrorism that we've seen in public policy for years. So you do see a lot of Black folks in the past week who are just like, you know, that's not my business. You know, don't bring it to my neighborhood, but we have to do everything possible to keep each other safe. So glad to be part of this conversation.
Thank you so much for joining us. And now Commissioner Patel, whom is the only person on the call that I don't previously know. So tell us a little bit about yourself, how to pronounce your name, and how you'd like to be called.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tripti Patel. I identify by the pronoun she, her, hers. I'm the Advisory Neighborhood Commissioner for 2A03, which is the historic Foggy Bottom area. And you know, and like I said, I'm very lucky, very appreciative to be on this call with my fellow colleagues, Commissioner Dofo and Commissioner Green. Both of them are exemplary leaders. Like they've really been able to amplify and get help to their communities. You know, I got involved in local politics when my then council member Jack Evans didn't take my vote seriously. I was one of the preeminent faces for the local one fair wage battle known as Initiative 77. So we can't sit here and ask people to get engaged in their government and then say that their vote doesn't matter. And, you know, and I believed that very, very fiercely. So, you know, I didn't get mad. I just ran for office and got elected. And, you know, what's very disturbing about what happened, you know, a week ago today is it was like the local level just amplified on a national platform. I mean, we held an election. We tell these citizens to, you know, go out there, vote. We have a democratic process that's supposed to be sacred. And then when the election is held and the results come out and people don't like it, they want to throw a fit, they want to throw a tantrum and say, well, we stole the election. This isn't real. And I had a huge problem with that because, you know, you can't sit here and say black voices, brown voices, black votes, brown votes don't matter. And that was what that attempted coup attempt was. It was a blatant disregard for the BIPOC communities that participated in this election. And, you know, at the end of the day, you know, I'm starting to feel a lot like, you know, my fellow colleagues on this call, which is, you know what, you know, we're sitting here, we are going out there holding our elected officials accountable. You know, there have been policies in place that deliberately disparage my Black and brown siblings, and it's not fair.
Okay, thank you so much. And do you want to be Commissioner Patel, or how do you go by your first name, or?
I mean, whatever is comfortable for you. I answered to Tripti and I answered to Commissioner Patel. So.
And okay, and are we going with Lorenzo? Is that what we're going? I don't like to call people by the wrong name. So, and I came from a time when you never called a person by their first name without permission. And so I'm like really, you know, I'm still trying to navigate how we speak to each other in the, what is this now, the 21st century. So what I thought I'd do, and I hope this is okay with all my guests, is I have a really short slide presentation that shows some of the demands that Black Lives Matter DC made before we got to January 6th. Back in December, and for those who might not know, if you're not from DC or if you just weren't, didn't get, like, news doesn't always get out in the same way across the country or even across our city. We had incursions of white supremacists who did damage and terrorized people, especially people who were trying to protect the Black Lives Matter memorial fence. And then in November and then in December, we had Black churches near downtown that were attacked. And so before January 6th, Black Lives Matter DC was calling for certain interventions that were hoped that if government officials took them seriously, we could have prevented some of what went on. So I'm just going to very briefly, I'm sorry, I am still kind of a neophyte after all these months at this like share screen thing, but I'm going to give it a shot. And and of course we are also on the radio, so I'm going to have to explain what's on the screen, which I know is annoying to people, but this is what we're doing. So here's a few slides, and then I'll ask Lorenzo to add his perspective on what happened then and what is being called for now. So even though the screen will be up, if you want to speak, you can go ahead. So I'm going to put it up now. And okay, I don't know if this is going to be, maybe this isn't going to work the way I wanted it to. So I'm sorry, I really am not good at this, but I wanted to point out that before January 6th, Black Lives Matter DC had called for denouncing white supremacists who were coming to DC and refusing to do business with white supremacists, was trying to get hotels to deny reservations. The only success, as far as I know, was that the Harrington Hotel, which had been a center for the Proud Boys, actually did close down, closed its bars, closed itself to protect its own employees and other people for several days. And the Eaton Hotel also announced, which is downtown, also announced that it was closing. So since I'm sorry, I'm really bad at this. So Lorenzo, do you want to just take it from there and explain a little bit more about what was requested?
Sure. Basically, what we wanted to do is get out front of what we've been seeing for the last 2 months, at least the last 2 months since Election Day. There have been bands of white supremacists that have been coming into Washington, D.C. 2 previous occasions to hold rallies, to hold organizing events. They've been using Harry's Bar as the organizing spot in the city, which is why there was a lot of pressure to shut down Harry's Bar and basically give the mayor the tools to use the COVID-19 guidelines to really put pressure on this bar to shut down, because they were not abiding by any of them. There were folks who were call themselves MAGA going to this bar with no masks in big crowds, and the city didn't seem to know how to address that. So we wanted to get out in front of that, to really pressure businesses to, for one, don't allow these people to come into your establishment with no masks, speaking racial epithets, whatever. We also wanted to challenge the hotels to state that these folks have been staying in the same hotels for the last 2 months, and we know which ones they are. So we're calling on you, Hyatt Place, Capitol Hilton, you name it, Hotel Harrington, which did shut down the day of the rally, which was one of the central hotels that a lot of the white supremacists were staying at. We wanted to challenge them all to, you're making business off of white terror, and that should not be allowed in the District of Columbia. And we're seeing a more coordinated push now after what happened, where we're seeing a lot more hotels have the conversation of possibly shutting down the week of inauguration. We also wanted to challenge our leaders in the city, because the previous 2 times that white supremacists came here and attacked folks and caused nights of violence, there was a struggle for leaders to form the language to denounce white supremacists. And that for me was a problem. You can't state that you're going to represent me as a DC resident and you don't know how to open your mouth and say, I condemn white supremacists, and naming who these people are, not hiding behind vague language. Let's call a spade, call these people exactly who they are. And we also wanted to challenge people to pay attention. You know, these folks have been really committed to everything they've said publicly on social media, on forums. All of this has been public, open source information. There's been no secret about this. You know, they've been very clear about what their intentions were when they came here to DC. They wanted to stop the steal. They wanted to storm the Capitol. They recorded endless videos making clear what they wanted to do, and they did it. You know, the only flip side of that is, you know, we didn't see the same response from not only U.S. Capitol Police, who killed Miriam Carey some years ago, who was a Black woman with her child in her car, who made the wrong turn and was shot dead. You know, we didn't see U.S. Park Police, who killed Trey Joyner back in '09, my former H.D. Woodson classmate. We didn't see DC police out in full force, as one would expect, since they've been in full force against Black folks. You know, we didn't see them out to try to minimize some of the activity that we were seeing in our city before they even got to the Capitol steps. So this has really been a failure in law enforcement on all levels, but really this is what's expected to happen. You know, law enforcement protects white supremacy, they protect whiteness, and we saw a public display of that. You know, it only underlines why so many people have been screaming defund the police since the last year, because many of us have always known that law enforcement has been a breeding ground for white supremacists. They're carrying the same mission they had since they were created, slave catchers. So the fact that we're seeing endless reports, one after another, of off-duty police officers, military vets, you know, police detectives, you know, people in the Secret Service, people in the U.S. Capitol Police Department who were involved in this, you know, this riot, this takeover of government, this act of white terrorism. It only shows you what exactly we're living in, you know? And as a DC resident, I'm more concerned now because now we're heavily in a police state. You know, we have, what, 15,000 National Guardsmen and women here right now to give a show of force, right? To make people feel safe, the same game that we've been doing to our own residents. But the fact of the matter is, they were already there. They already had these tools in place, and they allowed it to happen because these were their people. You know, anytime you're seeing cops putting on MAGA hats and taking selfies and opening doors, you know, you got to wonder, are any of these cases going to hold up? You know, because people let them in. So I don't know if you can call it a break-in. I don't know. But that's a reckoning that white America has to deal with.
Oh, thank you so much. That was very clear, and I hope people are listening. And I do want to let listeners know that Tripti Patel has agreed to stay on longer than our first two guests. So I want to make sure that Salim has a chance to speak and to add in. I know that you have slightly different perspectives, I think, and instead of trying to speak for you, just I want you to add anything that that either you've learned recently. I know you were involved with some things about trying to protect churches east of the river and some of the other things. So whatever you'd like to add at this point.
Yeah, I'm gonna disagree with my commissioner in saying that the law enforcement agencies were protecting white supremacists. I don't think that they were protecting. I think that the country was founded on white supremacy. So they weren't doing anything other than what they were founded to do. The original founding fathers, I can't say for sure all of them, you know, had slaves, but I think if one might have not had slaves, right? And so when we're looking at the way that this country was put together, it's only operating out of the way that it was founded. The Dred Scott decision ruled that no African had any rights that a white person was bound to respect. We see how police were formed as slave catchers. We saw in Reconstruction that people who tried to vote, people who tried to help Black people vote, were dragged up out of polling places. They were beaten to death. they were intimidated. Angry white mobs would run people of color, African people, indigenous people, offer their lands and take it from them. We saw treaty after treaty after treaty, never ever honored by the American government. And this is what they teach us in class, right? They taught us about the Trail of Tears. So I don't think that it's doing anything to necessarily show that, okay, we're on their side. I think this has always been, what it was. We just weren't really paying attention. I think it might have been within the last 2 years, someone correct me if I'm wrong, that an armed militia group stormed the Capitol in either Washington or Oregon. So seeing militia groups storm the Capitol.
Kidnap officials in Michigan. Yeah, we've
Right.
had a lot of stuff that was just kind
Last year.
of
Right. So
they tried to kidnap a governor last year.
This isn't anything new. Our ability to have technology that can communicate it at a more rapid pace is new. And so I think for us, as we try to organize during this time, some of the stuff that we need to do, we can't discuss in platforms like this, but we definitely need to, excuse me, someone tried to give me a call. Things that we need to do, we can't discuss on these kind of platforms. But what we can do is continue to have a certain level of situational awareness and continue to study, because then that will get you in the right mindset. Security isn't, okay, we're going to put on a uniform and we're going to have somebody at the door and we're checking people, right? No, security is it's a mindset. And then it's making sure that we get the right people in the right places that can make the right decisions. And so I'm confident that when I know that there's somebody like Anthony Lorenzo Green, who's in that seat, he can make the right decision. Or Trupti Patel that's in that seat, she can make the right decision, because I don't even want to say they're infiltrated, because these ideas have always been there. So I can't call it an infiltration. It was against the law at one point in time for Black people to read, right? So they didn't infiltrate and then create a law. These laws were just born out of the idea of white supremacy. So I think that, and I don't really disagree with them, but I think that if we change the lens and how we're looking at it, it's not as if these things are something new. These things have always been here. And now it's like a fish. A fish is consistently surrounded by water. And then when you take that fish out of water, it starts to panic. It doesn't know what's happening. And so we see that for the most part, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant men, right, have always had it their way. The only way to vote in this country was to be a white man over the age of 30 who owned land. So that excluded white women, right? And that excluded everybody else, right? White men over the age of 30 who owned land.
I do want to interrupt for a sec, and I'm not sure if this is a question that is easy to answer, but before I lose the two of you, I wanted to ask about, for many people, it was not surprising. And, there are different lenses we can put on how to understand what was happening. A lot of people actually liken it to the pushback that we saw during and after Reconstruction, because white people don't like Black people to be voting or to have any power. But I want to ask specifically if either one of you have a perspective, and we'll get to Commissioner Patel in a few minutes, about what happened on January 6th. Worries me as a person who is, very near physically the situation, as well as somebody who's concerned about all of our neighbors, including the unhoused and everybody else. It seems to be like it was, in a way, kind of what I think they call it, a penetration test, like to see how far you can get without being pushed back. And, that's usually like a computer thing, like how if you can get into if you can hack a computer.
Like a hacker?
Yeah, but, this is a common thing in history where people push ahead to see which way the military and the police are going to go. And while I don't want to make blanket declarations that we just can't be protected at all. It's pretty scary that they were let in to to the congressional building. And as as Lorenzo described earlier, DC had so many opportunities to stop them in November, in December, or in January 5th and 6th, and did not do it. So do we trust the National Guard or police at all? And I know it's a funny question to ask because I have white skin and y'all have
well, I'll jump in there and I'll say this.
Wait,
I think when we're looking at like the history of slavery, we know that it didn't end because of the 13th Amendment having a clause. So it might have not been as profitable to continue it in the same format. And so then they switch up the techniques, right? So we'll just arrest you and then put you right back to work. And it's just less stressful to deal with, having to worry about you coming in my house in the middle of the night. And so it's just less stressful to have to fight this bloody war. And then, you can't win it in the media. So then it might not be anything that takes place from the 17th through the 20th, but that doesn't mean it's going to stop. So you know what? Let's go and put somebody in place in government, or we're going to get a judge, or we're going to run somebody else for office. And then we're going to put these, reverse some of these laws or make it more difficult, or we're not going to hire some people. And I think that's something that we always have to be aware of. But I think at this point in time, nothing should ever be taken off of the table. And we have to look at this from an international perspective. These things happen often in other countries, right? So this isn't anything new. We're just not used to it happening for us. But if you also look at the way the streets roll, politics doesn't change. It's whoever got the most muscles going to win. So the politics on the street level is often the same way, right? All right, you got today, but we're going to come back tomorrow. Or we're going to come back 6 months later. I'm not going to forget. I'm going to get you. So I think we just always have to just stay vigilant, but also look at the long game and look at how would they move strategically to avoid the backlash now. And then you know what? When things quiet down, we'll strike again, and then they won't necessarily attach the two, but the desired outcome is the same.
Okay. Lorenzo, did you want to add something?
Yeah. And we definitely have to acknowledge, because the point that you raised earlier that, they were sort of trying to test the system. Yeah, that's what the pipe bombs were for, placing pipe bombs at RNC and DNC. They were on timers, they were active, but they didn't go off, so it seemed like they were trying to see where were the police going to go? Where were the resources going to run to? That's why MPD only had just 100 officers at the Capitol at first. That's why people are seeing a video going around of a DC police officer being dragged down the stairs and beaten with an American flag. They found ways to spread the resources that could have been available, along with coordination with federal government to make sure certain federal resources were not on the table, like park police. So, we saw how it played out. But for the community standpoint, I always like to push people to really believe that we can keep each other safe. And I had a very strong conversation with a neighbor last night who just legitimately just were very concerned. Like, what will happen if they come riding through our neighborhoods? And I say, you know what? There have been moments in the last 2 months where they've had, and people didn't know. But some of us did. And some of us saw what happened when they did. We can't speak on those things, but we know that there are many people in our community that go above and beyond to keep each other safe, especially from something like this. There's a viral video going around of an old timer, just talking his mess, giving the business, like, don't park on this street now, just don't bring that mess here, and that's the type of attitude that I want people in DC to carry with them. I don't want folks to get fearful of what this white rage that they're seeing. I want folks to really look within ourselves and our community to find out ways that we can keep each other safe. As long as we continue to work at building networks with each other, ways that we can tear down some of these barriers that we have because of our ideas of what safety is. We're so comfortable with just calling the police. Oh, I don't like what I saw on that corner. Or I don't like those people behind my house. Or I don't like that person walking down the street. A lot of time, these folks that you see over and over and over in your community are the same people that will be looking out for you. The same people that be watching your car when somebody trying to break in. But because that person know who that person is, they won't even bother with that block because they know word's going to get around. These are relationships that we have to build with each other to keep each other safe. While at the same time, like Salim said, you have to be vigilant. You have to be aware. You have to know what's going on. And we have to really, put holes into some of these false narratives of what safety is so that we can get into a space where we're reimagining what that looks like for us.
Okay, we're coming to the bottom of the hour, and I know Salim has to leave us, and I think Lorenzo's time is short as well. So I do want to remind listeners that you are hearing We Act Radio broadcasting from historic Anacostia, Washington, D.C. I always say that even though we're in our own living rooms or whatever. Thank you so much. You were listening to Commissioner Salim Adolfo, who is with ANC 8C07 and also the National Black United Front and many, many other hats. And we also were listening to Anthony Lorenzo Green, who is representing Black Lives Matter DC, and also ANC 7C04. Is that right? Thank you to both of you for your participation and for all the work you've been doing for such a long time. And as we shift into the second half of the show, we're going to hear more from Trupti Patel, who is another ANC commissioner from a different part of the city and who's been part of an organizational response to our upcoming situation. Be safe. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, and shout out to Trupti. Congratulations on your re-election.
So let me reiterate that this is We Act Radio. This is the program called Community Through COVID. And ordinarily we do spend a lot of time talking about at least some aspect of our health pandemic and what that's doing, and that it's not unrelated to what's going on now. But because of our particular situation, I decided we're mostly going to focus on the inauguration week and how local people who care about local interests are responding. And Commissioner Trupti Patel was part of a response that brought together ANC commissioners, and just really briefly for those who are outside the city, advisory neighborhood commissioners do an awful lot of work they're in very local situations with their constituents, and then they work together in groups that work on zoning issues and all kinds of safety issues. But for this initiative, it isn't through ANCs didn't vote for it in the same way. And again, instead of me trying to explain what happened, I think I will ask Trupti to just lead us through how this letter came to be.
Certainly. Once again, thank you for having me on your show. Good morning, audience. So how this letter came about is that, 1 week ago, all of us were horrified at seeing, the seditious act of an attempted coup of the current US government, all because a faction of white supremacists didn't agree with the election results. And the fact that they chose to come to our home, terrorize our neighborhoods, our neighbors, our Black and brown, vulnerable residents, who are unhoused, our Black and brown residents who are working in our hotels, our Black and brown residents who are, working as bartenders and servers in our local restaurants. And for them to come in here and say that, that we don't matter, you're going to come in here, destroy our city. You're going to sit here. I mean, we're already battling a huge rise in COVID-19 cases. We've done everything we can to keep ourselves safe. And then here these white supremacists come into town, cause an insurrection. And we as ANC commissioners, were livid. We felt like there was just massive failure in leadership on all levels of government, from the federal to to our local officials. And we were kind of feeling like, where is the response from our elected officials? It was kind of almost like, yes, they came out and said, oh, this is bad, we don't like it. But at the same time, like, we, as being the eyes and ears for our neighborhoods, felt that their responses weren't adequate. We were like, okay, where is the specific pushbacks? And so what we as ANC commissioners decided, and this was our first week in our terms. Like, I'm a returning ANC commissioner, but for many of my colleagues that wrote this letter, this was their first week of their first term. This is how they started their ANC term. And they felt that, what, our leaders need to do better and should be doing better. And so they drafted a letter stating specific guidelines that they wanted our leaders to take. And, some of which was, what, like, we don't want hotels housing white supremacists. We're asking hotels around the city, what, don't take these reservations, close. And the reason why we're doing that is because the hotel staff that's having to work during the MAGA folks coming through town are Black and brown folks who are getting harassed and bullied. No one should be harassed and bullied to make $1. We're also hearing that these insurrectionists are going to our restaurants, causing health issues. Like, servers should not be the healthcare marshals. You can't sit there and say to the person who you're depending on a living for, because, at this point, tips are the wages. They're not the bonus on top of wage. They are the wages. So you're going to look at the person who makes the difference between you having food on your table, the roof over your head, and say, what, could you please put on your mask? No one is going to sit here and want to get into a verbal or physical altercation. And then at the end of the day, when people are living off of the sub-minimum wage, which gets eaten up in your tax responsibilities, you want someone to literally die serving someone, dying to serve a white supremacist? That's not acceptable. And so we said, what? No, like, we need to sit here. We need to hold our elected officials accountable and say, what? This is the things that we need to know, that our community is safe. And, we need to make sure our unhoused neighbors are taken care of, because what? They're vulnerable targets. When these people come into our town and they don't have the usual suspects that they can pick on, they're not going to be able to go to the Capitol. All these target places that they could have had are now taken away from them. So they're already enraged. They're already seeing, what? Businesses don't want them here. They're enraged. They're going to see, servers, bartenders, other cashiers, essential workers, advocating and stepping back and saying, what, I'm enforcing my right to not wait on you. That's going to turn into a rage. So they're going to have all this rage seething. They're going to want to take it out on someone and somewhere. So where's our unhoused neighbor going to go? Because they have nowhere to go but to be on that street. And, it shouldn't have to take someone dying, someone being hung, someone being murdered for citizens to act, for our leaders to act. And, and that is one of the reasons why, I 100% back Commissioner Green and why I back Commissioner Adolfo. I mean, they are the eyes and the ears of their neighborhoods. And we need to sit here, and when our fellow colleagues are saying, we're being terrorized, they are with deliberate intention targeting our neighborhoods and coming for us, we need to listen.
So these, first of all, I just want to say real quickly that due to our current broadcast situations, I am using, neighborhood internet, and sometimes it goes out and I'm getting a message that I'm unstable, which always makes me, yeah, it's unstable. All right. But so if by chance you lose me, just keep talking for a minute and I'll come.
Okay.
Just want you to know, Zoom has explained that whoever else is on the call becomes a temporary host. So just so you know that, and so our listeners know that, we're doing our, this is almost a year now that we've been doing these, what were supposed to be temporary ad hoc things. And, we're still at it, and we're still doing our best. But I still miss having an engineer who can hold things down and keep the show going. But here we are. So, you talked a lot about service workers and about people who are experiencing homelessness. And these are groups that, last night I heard ANC 6B, which is my own ANC, had a meeting, and the commander for the first district, the police district that covers Capitol Hill, several times she was challenged about unhoused people. And she said, well, of course, they don't have to obey the command to stay home, but she didn't have any suggestions for keeping that very vulnerable population protected. And the suggestions that the ANC commissioners came up with in this letter include trying to get the city to reimburse hotels and have hotels take people who are currently living in tent encampments or otherwise on the street inside, and to also create, it says, limit access and exposure by violent insurrectionists, however possible, to known areas where individuals experiencing homelessness reside, and historic Black churches, because we did have both in November and December, and this idea that people are testing things out really does kind of, I know, I won't say kind of, really does scare a lot of people. Black churches and the people who try to defend Black Lives Matter memorial fence, really did, they felt invaded, and they were physically harmed and terrorized. So can you speak a little bit about those requests for the city to intervene, and if anybody from the city is actually responding?
So I know we just recently put out the letter. I mean, it was directed to the mayor as of yesterday. And as from what I've heard from the coalition ANCs, that we have not gotten a response back from the city. And we need to be we are having to ask these questions and hold our leaders accountable. We can't, I mean, if anything, to what it taught all of us as a city, and especially as elected officials, that you can't assume that there are people who dotted their I's and crossed their T's. And now we are sitting here having to say, what, did anybody think about this scenario? What are you going to do? We need answers. We cannot assume that just because we've raised the issue that you will now take us seriously, because what, obviously we didn't. We saw the failure of what happened when concerns were raised and they weren't taken seriously. Everyone just wanted to say, oh, what happened on the 6th was just, it was just talk. We shouldn't have blown it up. Well, now we're going to act in a very different method, which is, what, we're tasking you with this, and until you give us a specific response, whether you're going to do it or not going to do it, we need to know that. Because if you're going to fail in your aspect of leadership, then we need to know this so we can vote you out of office, number one. Number two, if you are not going to take care of us, we will keep us safe, as Anthony Lorenzo Green has stated. You know what? Like he said, we need to stop looking at the police to protect us. We need to look to each other to keep us safe. And so if our government leaders and our law enforcement agencies are not going to serve that function, which they claim that they're here to protect us as residents, but they're not. It is very disparate in how they protect their residents. And what it is the resident that has the least amount of protection is our unhoused neighbors. So you know what? They're the most vulnerable. So the ones that are the most vulnerable are the ones who need the most fierce form of advocacy. So that's what we're doing. We're sitting here, we're all saying, you know what? We are government officials. We are elected just like you. And we are tasking you to come up with with the solution, because you have not empowered us to do that. I am not on that dais as an official DC council member, and I am not as elected as the mayor to sit there and direct funding. So if we could be in that chair, I know if Commissioner Adolfo was up there or Commissioner Green was up there, it would be a completely different situation. You know what? They would be tasking funds to go to our unhoused neighbors, but we don't have that ability to control the money. So, we have to push on those actors that do. And so, you know what? If we have to embarrass you, if we have to shame you, I'm all about it, because you know what, if it means embarrassing you so that a vulnerable member of our community gets to feel safe and not be a target for white supremacists, then it's worth it for us.
And so at this point, I don't know, methodologically or strategically, you're asking individuals who might be listening, or who will hear about this later on, to contact their own ANC commissioners to have them sign this letter. And what other actions should they just directly go to the mayor about it?
So not only should our local residents, contact their ANC commissioner and say either two things: thank them for signing on to the letter, or say, I request you sign on to the letter. And if you're not signing on to the letter, ask why. That is your elected representative, because at the end of the day, if they're not going to represent your values, then you need to vote them out. Number one. Number two, what listeners can do is, contact the mayor, contact local restaurants in your area, and say to the mayor, shut down the city. Say to everybody, don't have the restaurants open. Make sure that they're as less people as possible out there working right now. What residents can do is, task their local restaurants to say, I insist you don't serve white supremacists if you're going to stay open. If they're going to close, make the request to that restaurant. Pay your staff to stay home. Also, local residents, find your favorite bartender, find your favorite server, find out what their Venmo handle is, send them a tip. Literally send them a virtual tip. If they're worried about how people are going to make their money, send it to them. And if they're not comfortable giving it directly to a server or a bartender, there are organizations such as Rock DC that runs a restaurant mutual aid group. They can donate there. They'll make sure that funds get to vulnerable workers who, if they missed income, will now have the ability to eat. They can get involved with One Fair Wage. I'm the lead DMV organizer for One Fair Wage in Washington, DC right here. I'm in contact with several workers who are in need of resources. If they, want to send me a message, they can contact me through my ANC email, which is 2a03@anc.dc.gov. They can also contact me through my work email, trupti@onefairwage.org. And if they say, look, I want to make a donation that goes to, making sure workers are housed and fed, I will make sure that funds go to particular workers, or a fund is started up where workers can put in a request to say, I need assistance. And I know that there's a fund in place. So, like I said, if the citizens of DC do those three things, if the residents of DC do those three things, you will see a lot more of a different response from our leadership. Because if the people of DC say, not today, you don't get us to be they're not going to terrorize us in our city. I'm not going to let them terrorize us, but I will make sure that the people in this city who have to work in very vulnerable situations are protected.
And we have seen that things are starting to, some corporations are responding. Airbnb announced that they are reimbursing people for reservations and asking that they all be canceled, so for the DC area. So, or I don't know how, if it's just specific to inside DC. I don't know the specifics, but they did respond in a very powerful way just this morning. So we are seeing a little bit of people taking it seriously. And there wasn't an attempt to get hotels to close before January 6th. And it was not as successful as many of us would have liked. And another thing that I don't think this letter specifically speaks to it. But another thing that I just would like to bring into the conversation is that also before January 6th, there were a lot of people asking the mayor to stop using this language of First Amendment activity. She kept saying that it was out of her hands to do anything because, of course, DC First Amendment activity, we have to allow it. And now she's saying that she has, you know, the right to ask Homeland Security to do this, that, and the other thing to stop permits. And up until like a week ago, she was still saying it's out of our hands. We didn't issue the permit. So, and that is something that ANCs ordinarily do have. They're supposed to have, again, for those who are listening who are not from DC, or, you know, we have such a weird government. ANCs are supposed to have great weight when it comes to anything that impacts their residents and businesses. So if an event is going to happen, like years ago, we had Nazis in Lincoln Park, which is not too far from me, because Lafayette Park was somehow unavailable. So the Park Service plopped them down in a residential neighborhood. And this idea that, well, that's a First Amendment thing, and so you have no protection, got thrown back at us. But ANCs are supposed to have some weight. So I don't see that as one of the points here. And I think the mayor didn't make that like pronouncement until it's all happening very fast a few days ago. But are the ANCs weighing in on that idea that armed insurrectionists are not First Amendment people?
I mean, honestly, I think our ANC response, community response was pretty clear. We don't believe that, you know, that fit into First Amendment rights. And, you know, and frankly, many of us as ANC commissioners and community representatives felt like the mayor was very weak on that. Like, no, we knew immediately, like, she was kowtowing, she was trying to be politically correct. I don't know who she was trying to placate and soothe in that angst. I mean, you know, the reality is Washington, D.C. is a chocolate city. It is a predominantly Black city. And when you are the elected official that represents a predominantly Black city, and for you to sit there and be tone deaf to the literal trauma that is being inflicted upon your city, you're not a leader. And you know, and then if you want to talk about First Amendment, you know, activities, you know, when BLM protesters, you know, exercised their First Amendment rights, and they did it in a peaceful and organized way, the response was to militarize it, to sit there and say, you know what, these protesters who are, you know, observing health protocols by being masked, even participating in some cases socially distant, and just saying, you know what, we are here to say, you know what, our lives matter. That, you know what, we are saying that entities that have this, you know, get government funding sanctioned by our government are terrorizing. They are getting a license to kill members of our community, and then to be treated like, oh, you know what, that's outlandish. No, you're seen as a threat. And to sit there and to have like a military response on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. You know, I remember when the protests were happening, you could see military everywhere. But you know what? When you know, when people who felt that the election was stolen from them, they show up into our city by 8,000 people, and that everybody is saying, well, let's not militarize them. Let's not militarize that type, the response to them. Oh, let's not give them more importance. What happened at the Capitol happened because it was allowed to happen. And so let's talk about that truth. You know, no one in America wants to sit here and say, oh, you know, that it was allowed. It was allowed to happen. How did they know to go in certain locations? How were they able to literally storm the Capitol? They didn't storm the Capitol. They were let in. You saw videos of like literally where officers just went up, opened that. You know, those officers, U.S. Capitol Police, are being paid by my tax dollars. They're being paid by us. So why should Black and brown residents of this city continue to fund an entity that isn't protecting them. It was never there to protect them, as my fellow commissioners said before this call. They're here to uphold white primacy at the end of the day. What we're seeing, I mean, the conversation around people have been saying is, what did those protesters not get? What have they not gotten all their lives? They're in a position of primacy. They've never been discriminated against in going for a job. They've never sat there and been told that, that your name sounds funny, you speak with an accent. They've always had the privilege of being able to go into any job, any situation, and be given validity. They always say in this country, oh, the truth is always going to be dependent on who the messenger is. I mean, that right there was the ultimate sign of, white privilege. So when people sit there and say white privilege doesn't exist, it existed. It happened on that Capitol on January 6th. When they say, the police protect everyone, no, they didn't. They don't protect everyone, because they don't protect people like me. They don't protect people like Commissioner Adolfo, and they don't protect people like Commissioner Green. I have to sit here and I have to now worry that when I see a police officer, are they going to think I'm a terrorist? Because what happens is, when they see brown people, they think we're terrorists. When they see black people, they think they're thugs. But really, who's the thug and who's the terrorist? It isn't me. It wasn't my colleagues on the call before. It's your clean cut white man, and it's your clean cut white woman. So let's be real and have that conversation in America. And you know what, when people sit there and say, well, we need to move past this, no, we cannot move past this, because there needs to be a reckoning. There needs to be an honest conversation now.
And so we only have a few minutes left, but you've already said that you want residents and people who care about the district to either get their commissioner to sign the letter, or to contact the mayor, and also the council. The council's been a little more vocal since the new council members were elected in early January, or were joined the council in early January, but still we're not hearing a lot or enough, I think, from the council so far. So, we want people to connect with their elected representatives and demand how they're going to protect the most vulnerable people. What else would you like to say about your own work in protecting the city in the last couple minutes? Anything we didn't cover yet?
I mean, basically, like, my job is, I try to keep workers safe in this city. And, if I'm sitting here and I'm getting emails from workers asking me what are their rights in regards to, if they're going to get fired if they don't go to work, or if they show up to work and they're going to say, what, I don't feel comfortable waiting on a white supremacist, and I think this is really sad. Like, why are we putting workers in this position? Not only like tipped workers, but, essential workers, people who are cashiers at grocery stores, people who are working at establishments like the Wawa, that we are sitting here, we are asking people to literally wait on people who find their very existence denigrative. We are exposing our workers to more trauma that does not need to happen. And, we need to stop being a city and a society where everything is constantly about the bottom line. Like, everything is profit driven. You know what? These hotels don't want to close because in their mind, they're like, well, it's about our profit. But you know what? We need to stop being a society that places so much value on the dollar, and we need to start placing value on, our humanity and the humanity that exists in each other. You know what? We need to sit there and say, what? Not everything can be about money. We need to say, what? Our residents need to feel safe. We don't need to expose them to that. We need to sit there and say, what? Let's forego the money. And it might be a little rough and it might be a little bit bumpy, but like, let's count on each other to make sure we can get through this, because that is how we will get through this. And we will be a stronger and better city for it.
Terrific. That will be our almost last word. You were just listening to Commissioner Trupti Patel, and it's fair wage that you...
I work for One Fair Wage.
One
So
Fair-
we are a civil rights advocacy organization whose sole mission statement is to get rid of the last vestige of Jim Crow, which is the sub-minimum wage.
Okay, so we'll put that link on communitythroughcovid.com, as well as this letter we've been referencing, and ask people to keep promoting these recommendations to their council members. And I thank Commissioner Patel and also Commissioner Adolfo and Commissioner Green, who were with us earlier. This is Virginia Avniel Spatz for We Act Radio. Thank you for listening. Peace.